Ronan is a single, virgin, a loser, and also a pervert. He is our protagonist, and he is also a single virgin loser. In addition, he is an orphan, and as if that weren't bad enough, these bald creatures killed his sister and all of his companions. He is an orphan in front of his very eyes, and now he is also on the verge of passing away. In spite of this, moments before he passed away, he kissed his captain, who was only half alive. After that, he traveled back in time to ask a woman, "Do you have a dick?" There is no one who understands how, where, or why these bald aliens attacked Earth, but after a particularly difficult 10 years of conflict, 2 of these bald beings have died. Nevertheless, during the process, each and every one of the hunters and warriors of Earth was eliminated, and Ronan himself was on the verge of passing away once he had eliminated the final one. At that very moment, he noticed a sound and hastily made his way toward the sound in order to locate his leader. The first thing that appeared on his face was a smile, which gave the impression that he may be able to repopulate Earth once more. However, the joy quickly changed into shock when he saw the severe injuries she had sustained. She had lost one of her limbs, and blood was flowing out of her stomach. The face of the general was solemn and pale, and her body was the only thing that was just holding on to life. It appeared as though she was seated, with the boulder providing her with support. Her eyes spoke a mixture of grief and resolve to the world around her. This particular general's name was Adeshan. She responded to Ronan's question about her well-being by saying that she was breathing, at least for the time being. However, she then inquired with a serious tone, "Is that damn god dead?" It was verified by Ronan that he had just finished off the last of the so-called gods that were disguised as monsters and that the body of the creature was not too far away from where we are. While Adeshan was listening to this, she let out a sigh of relief. Her eyes began to well up with tears after a moment. She continued to shed tears. She expressed gratitude to Ronan for slaying God. Following an awkward pause, Ronan looked at the general with a grin and asked whether or not she was actually appreciative. It was his wish that she would ensure that all of his friends and fellow soldiers were given a fitting burial service. Ronan began coughing before the general could say anything, and his blood-covered hand signaled to the general that his time was approaching with a shaky grin on his face. The general responded that he could do it himself since he was better than she was. However, before Ronan could say anything further, he coughed. He knew he would pass away at any moment. His request was granted, and the general then asked about whether or not there was anything more he would like to accomplish if he survived. The response that Ronan gave was that he had an overwhelming number of things that he wanted to do, but he did so with a sad expression on his face. After looking up at the sky, he stated that the one thing that he thought about every day was the possibility of seeing his sister for the very last time. It was those accursed demons who called themselves gods who were responsible for her death, and he was unable to defend her from them. The taunt from the demon, which suggested that if Ronan had trained harder, he would have been able to save them, was eating him from the inside. However, all of a sudden, the rain stopped in mid-air, which shocked both Ronan and Adeshan. They were jolted even further as they looked up at the sky because the entire planet began to quake for no apparent reason. Every aspect of their world was flipped upside down. There was a white deity in front of them that had a divine aura, crimson eyes, and many wings. There were also dozens of other white deities standing next to it. Ronan was unable to believe what he was seeing, while Adeshan was frozen in panic, wondering if there weren't meant to be just 3 of them with a dejected look. Ronan was unable to believe what he was seeing. "So, even if I try to preserve Earth for the 3rd time, I won't be able to do it," she mumbled. Ronan yelled her name many times till she finally regained consciousness, while she was in a state of shock and was unable to respond. Since she had already given up, he informed her with a serious expression that they needed to get their act together and that she should hurry up and make herself ready for a battle. He was still perplexed by her decision to give up. It was hard for Adeshan to accept the fact that Ronan had not. She questioned him about whether or not he was truly going to fight, and Ronan responded by saying that it was preferable to fight rather than just sit there. Then, with a stern expression on his face, he continued to grip his sword while saying, "Today, even if he dies, he should at least destroy some of those damn pieces of filth," and he swung his sword with a tremendous deal of power. As a result of this, Adeshan Ronan continued to be in a state of shock, unable to appreciate its significance. Ronan's unwavering resolve. Adeshan turned her gaze to Ronan and reflected on the fact that, despite the precarious circumstances, he had not given up. After then, she came to the realization that Ronan had always been like this, which was the reason he had persevered to this point. While Adeshan was standing in front of the gods, he looked behind him and thought to himself, if it's this man, he really could do it. At that moment, she abruptly extended her hand, grasped Ronan's shoulder, and kissed him, which caused him to be startled. The gods watched from above, giving the impression that they were enjoying the display, although it was nothing more than a simple kiss. A blue stone that was blazing was being transferred from Adeshan's lips to Ronan's mouth. In a state of confusion, Ronan inquires about the contents of his mouth. With a little inclination, Adeshan leaned in close and muttered something. Whatever she was saying, Ronan was taken aback by it. He is uttering the words, "What nonsense is she saying at this serious moment?" with a voice that is filled with perplexity. Using a courteous tone of speech and a charming grin. The response that Adeshan gave was, "If we ever meet again, would you be able to help me avoid doing something that is pointless, such as being a commander?" As Ronan continued to be perplexed by what she was saying above them, the gods readied their assault and fired it in their direction, destroying them along with the whole planet around them. Ronan opened his eyes in a state of amazement and found himself looking at a vivid blue sky and lovely green fields. This was a scene that was quite different from the red sky and bloody rain that he was accustomed to seeing. The tale then circled back to where it began, with the blue marble burning. Ronan, who was still perplexed, carefully examined his surroundings. He saw fields and children playing, and he realized that he was in Nimberton, his birthplace. He questioned, "What the hell is going on?" He recalled the time when General Adeshan kissed him and transferred the blue stone to him. She had whispered in his ear about the secret of how she got so powerful and how she became one of the strongest people. He was now sitting beneath a tree, clutching his head, and thinking about the problem. He recalled the moment. The marble had the ability to bring the owner back in time, but the catch was that it could only be used 4 times, and she had already used it 3 times. She was giving the last chance to Ronan because she believed he was the only one who could stop the deities if he were trained properly, and then she recommended Ronan go to Phileon Academy, where he would be able to hold his abilities to the top. And Adeshan continued to smile joyfully, telling her to advise her to become a good tailor instead. She has worked in a variety of occupations, but she did not mention that that was their final discussion before they both perished along with the rest of the planet. Now Ronan was slamming his head on the tree he was sitting under, asking himself if this was all real or just a dream, and if it was a dream, he needed to snap out of it. The people around him were watching him in confusion, then suddenly he stopped, realizing something. "If I really came back to the past," he said to himself. With a glimmer of hope in his eyes, he grabbed a stick and started running, exclaiming that he would be able to see his sister again. He didn't care, even if it was a dream, he just wanted to see his sister one last time. Running fast through the streets, he finally accepted that he had indeed traveled back to the past, and his heart swelled with happiness. But then he stopped noticing something. Just beside the field, some people were bullying a kid, and upon observing them carefully, he realized that the child was somehow hung upside down. It wasn't by any rope, but by magic. It was impossible for the bullies to possess such high-level magic, as it was even uncommon on the battlefield, let alone in a small village like his. Suddenly, Ronan's attention was drawn to a young boy with red hair. He appeared terrified and was in a state of panic. The source of the powerful magic was this young boy, Her name was Assel, and she is a villager who lives close to his house. Ronan could see the magical aura around her wavering, as if she were having trouble maintaining control of it. He realized that she was the one who was keeping the bullied kid floating in the air, and it appeared as though she would not be able to keep him up for much longer. Meanwhile, the bullied kid was pleading for mercy, begging the bullies to stop. He was explaining that he didn't have any money left, his remaining cash was needed to buy medicine for his sick mother. If he gave them his money, his mother might die. Hearing this, the boss of the bullying group smirked and mocked, "Am I supposed to care about your mom's health too?" While he was receiving money from you, he began hitting the tormented child and telling him that if he wanted to be such a caring son, he should make more money. He chuckled along with the other members of his group, who were watching the entire incident with enjoyment. The leader of the bully gang was becoming increasingly irritated with Assel, so he went to her and gave her the order to carry the tormented child further up the tree. The girl's voice shook as she responded that she did not have the stamina to do so and that she was afraid that she would unintentionally drop him. Her plea fell on deaf ears as the boss grew furious, demanding that she lift the child higher, even saying that it would be better if the child fell. Assel was truly nervous, and now overwhelmed by the situation, she began to regret ever learning magic, thinking that if she hadn't, things might have been different. Tears welled in her eyes as she strained to lift the kid higher. She bit her lips as she felt like she was about to collapse just before she could fall. Someone struck her back with a wooden stick. It was Ronan who would intervene, telling them that they had gone far enough and that the child might die if they continued. When the red-haired kid lost control of his magic due to Ronan's intervention, the hanging child fell to the ground. The leader of the bully group yelled out in a furious manner, wanting to know what was going on, but Ronan did not pay heed to the behavior of the leader. He did this in order to protect the child with the red hair, who we later discovered is actually a boy called Assel and not a female. Ronan lives not far from Assel's house, so Assel recognized him right away. Although he was nervous, he introduced himself, and Ronan replied with a serious tone that he had some important work to do with him. From now on, he should ignore that piece of sh*t and stop getting nervous. The boss continued to shout angrily, feeling ignored, but Ronan simply continued this conversation with Assel by asking him where he had learned his magic. Assel replied, still nervously, that he had just learned it from a magic book he bought from a vendor. Hearing Assel's explanation, Ronan fell into deep thought. You couldn't believe that Assel could learn magic from some low-quality magic book on his own, and if Assel was indeed this talented, why hadn't I seen or heard about him in the past, or rather, in his future life? All the while, the bully boss was still shouting something in the background, but Ronan ignored him. Ronan came to the conclusion that he had made the decision to investigate that body in further depth later that evening, but for the time being, he had to deal with another issue. This was really remarkable to him, as he considered Assel's gift. The piece of sh*t had drawn his sword, clearly furious with Ronan for ignoring him. He adopted a fighting stance and then, with a roar, charged full force at Ronan as the sword descended toward him. Ronan immediately recognized it as a real long sword. He wondered where this bully had acquired such a weapon. He took in the boss's fighting form, noting that it was clumsy and untrained. Still, the boss seemed physically strong, and his attack could pose a threat to others but not to Ronan with an agile movement. Ronan dodged the boss's attack. The sword swooshed past him, hitting only air. Now more furious than ever, the piece of shit couldn't believe how Ronan, who he used to bully easily, had dodged his attack. Ronan, on the other hand, knew that even though his body was currently very weak, he had a secret weapon in his battle sense. The experience of countless battles fought in his life was ingrained in him. The piece of sh*t laughed and mocked Ronan, saying he was lucky to have dodged the attack. He even threatened to make Ronan incapable of lifting a spoon. Ronan replied sarcastically, expressing how lucky he indeed felt that day. The piece of sh*t made preparations for another assault, stating that if Ronan pleaded for forgiveness by clutching his foot, he could pardon him after he had severed one of his arms. Ronan, who appeared to be bored, just whined, "Oh my, how terrifying." The piece of sh*t continued, lowering his tone to something even more sinister. He said that if Ronan died today, he didn't need to worry about his older sister, as he would take good care of her every night. He even commented on her appearance, saying he thought about her every night before he could finish his sentence. Ronan's voice deepened, his eyes glowing red with fury. "Did you just say my older sister?" he asked, his voice dripping with menace. "Yes, those jiggly boobs will be nice to grab," he said, but before he could finish his sentence, Romance swung the wooden stick in his hand with full force, cutting off the piece of shit that was in his left ear, the piece of shit that was here when he was flying through the air, and he dropped his sword while clutching his injured head, screaming, crying, and feeling pain. His face became wrinkly and purple in color. While his body was rising in anguish, his subordinates gazed in horror, immobilized and unsure of what to do in response to a loud voice filled with fury directed at them. The expression on Ronan's face as he glared at him was that of a ferocious animal that was about to devour its victim. He hissed at you, "You little son of a bully. Do you wish to pass away?" As he continued to be in a state of amazement, one of the subordinates became extremely anxious and asked how it was even possible that the piece of sh*t had a sword, but Ronan slashed his ear with nothing more than a simple wooden stick. It is completely illogical to do so. The fury that Ronan felt did not go away. The subordinates were given a stare, and he demanded to know the reason why they were only observing. He proceeded by saying, if they don't want to end up like this piece of filth, they should take him with them and get lost, and of course they have to leave the money they stole from the kid plus some extra as compensation because they spoiled his mood. He did this while giving the piece of filth a kick in the head. The youngster who was being tormented received the bag full of money from Ronan, who claimed that it was his. When the child saw the bag, his eyes expanded, and he gazed at it. He questioned Ronan, in a state of amazement and terror, whether he was really going to give all of this money to him, taking into consideration that it was more than the amount that the piece of shit had taken from him. Providing the children with reassurance, Ronan stated that it is not a problem since he is already content with the long sword that he took away from them. He also stated that he does not need to be concerned about that piece of crap from this day forward, they will not be able to lift their heads again. As he praised Ronan, tears of happiness began to well up in the eyes of the children. From the depths of his being, Ronan ignored it as insignificant and pushed the child to rush home. However, from behind them, a trembling voice directed their attention to Assel so that they might pay attention to him. He was flushing from nervousness and apologized to the child with a shaky voice, regardless of how much that bit of filth threatened him. He was embarrassed by his inability to speak. He was aware that he ought not to have done it. He started weeping and said that he was too afraid to say anything, so he just obeyed their directions. He is sincerely remorseful and ashamed of himself for what he did. Despite the fact that his body was covered in tears, he continued to plead for pardon. The bullied child and Ronan observed him, and after a little pause, the children grinned and called out to each other in a fun manner. "Please, baby," Assel was weeping. I reassured him that it wasn't his fault and that he had forgiven him while putting his hand on his shoulder. He smiled broadly as he did so. Having said his goodbyes, he departed, leaving Ronan and Assel to their own devices. After giving Assel's physique a careful examination, Ronan came to the conclusion that being attractive is not a negative trait for a man. Is he just a youngster who is easygoing, and then he knocks Assel's shoulder with his knee, which causes him to be startled. As Ronan was departing, he reminded Assel once again to remember what he had said before, which was that he had serious business to speak with Assel. It was clear that he was perplexed. He called after Ronan, inquired about what it meant, and then fled away. He explained that he had some urgent business to attend to and that he would meet Assel in 3 days at the entrance of the forest when the moon rises, just to make it more romantic. After that, he said, and as for what would happen if he did not come well, he already knew that when Assel heard this, his imagination built up a terrifying vision of Ronan drawing his sword. He winked, and then he continued. After Ronan had departed, he found himself thinking, what just happened? He felt a chill run down his spine and instantly agreed to the meeting. However, once Ronan had left, he found himself wondering. What was Ronan's motivation for wanting to meet him in the bush at night? I was wondering what the significance of the business was that he was discussing. And what exactly was that remark about making it as romantic as possible? After that, the scene changed, and we saw Ronan standing next to his house while clutching a bunch of flowers in his hand. His cheeks turned red as a result of his uneasiness, shyness, and embarrassment. He turned around and began to move away from the home while saying to himself that he was aware that it was too humiliating to continue. Then, someone called out to Ronan in a friendly and courteous manner, indicating that she was curious about the identity of the person who was standing outside the house. A closer look revealed that it was his older sister. There were no words for Ronan. Following the sound of her voice, he turned around, and memories of the past began to fill his head completely. One and only his sister had been the driving force behind his success up to this point. Over the course of each day, he pondered the words that he would utter to her when they finally reunited in paradise. He was going to apologize for leaving the home without notifying her, but now that she was standing in front of him alive, he was unable to utter a single word. He was greeted with a warm grin by his sister when he returned home. He was overcome with feelings of happiness and warmth, and he had tears in his eyes as he murmured, "I'm finally home." Her eyes were filled with excitement and love. Nuna, it was a time filled with unadulterated feelings, a reunion that he had never imagined was even conceivable. Following that, we see Ronan, his Nuna, and Ronan all seated at the dinner table, taking pleasure in the meal that they are sharing together. While Nuna is ecstatically expressing her happiness over the fact that Ronan has purchased something for her for the very first time, she is holding the bouquet of roses in her tight grip. Ronan is in even greater embarrassment as a result of this, and he makes an effort to conceal his red cheeks. After some time has passed, Nuna begins to inquire as to whether or not he is satisfied, heaping a mountain of caring inquiries onto him. In some mysterious way, Ronan is able to get the situation under control and redirect the talk into regions that are more comfortable. After that, Ronan inquires, "What is Nuna's age this year?" She responds by saying that she is 22 years old, but she appears perplexed and asks why he would ask such a question out of the blue. The fact that Ronan's response is that he simply cannot recall causes her concern, and she responds by asking him yet another series of questions. However, Ronan is preoccupied with his own thoughts, and he realizes that if his sister is 22 years old, then those terrible gods will be on Earth in 10 of those years. Nuna appeared to be in a state of concern as she placed one hand on her forehead and the other on Ronan, examining his eyes. "I am concerned about his fever because he is acting in an unusual manner." Nevertheless, Ronan hopes that he might remain in this tranquil moment for the rest of his life. Because he is aware of the fact that, in order to preserve this moment, he must be ready for what will occur in 10 years. With a grin on his face, he tells her that he has something very important to tell her while holding his new hand. This causes Nuna to be perplexed, and she gazes at him with eyes that are wide and wondering. He continues to speak with a voice that is resolute and unwavering. "I am interested in getting married. I am interested in enrolling in the school." Nuna was first unable to articulate her thoughts after hearing Ronan's comments. However, when she began to shake Ronan's hand and quickly urged him to repeat what he had said, her eyes began to shine with enthusiasm. The answer with a delighted shriek was something that Ronan, who was perplexed, had not anticipated. When Nuna arrived at the cabinet, she immediately began looking for anything inside of it. Ronan's perplexity increased as he examined the contents of the enormous gallon that she had brought out of her bag. When he discovered that it was full of gold coins, he was perplexed. Nuna said that she had been keeping this money hidden for his future, and now that he has expressed interest in attending a school, she is eager to send him there as soon as possible. In the beginning, Ronan expressed his gratitude to her and stated that he was very appreciative, yet, he urged that she should utilize the money for herself. He went on to explain that the admission charge was quite exorbitant but that he had already been able to cover it. Nuna was taken aback when she heard this, as she had the realization that with such vast money, he could attend whatever academy he desired. However, before she could continue her statement, Ronan informed her that the institution in question is the Imperial Phileon Academy. When Nuna initially heard this name, she remained silent. However, as her eyes expanded, she yelled out the name of the exclusive institution known as the Imperial Phileon Academy, which was regarded as the most prestigious institution in the whole empire. Due to the fact that its instructors were very skilled people who had been recruited from all around the empire, the monthly fee was also exceptionally exorbitant. Nevertheless, the expense was not the only barrier. The selection rate for admittance was less than 0.1% due to the fact that the entrance examination would be notoriously tough in the future. Heroes such as Adeshan, the Sword King, and others fought against the gods till the very end of their lives. We are all graduates of this school, just as Ronan had anticipated we would be. It was his Nuna who was concerned, but she urged them on instead, assuring him that if he were Ronan, he would certainly pass the test. He experienced a revitalized feeling of resolve. He needed to succeed in the examination and go back to the village in order to safeguard Nuna. After waiting for some time, Asel finally arrived in Ronan and commented, "I thought you wouldn't come." Marcel Asel corrected nervously, "It was Asel, not Marcel." She continued mentioning that Ronan was the one who said it wouldn't be good for him if he didn't come. However, Ronan replied with a wave of his hand, suggesting they ignore the small details as tonight they will both be busy as he has something to test on an Asel. Ronan dropped his bag and stretched out, looking very sure of himself. A blushing and surprised person wanted to ask what Ronan was up to, but before he could run, he interrupted, pointing at Adam and Asel to use his psychic powers on him. He insisted on using the maximum power of his face, both confident and serious. Also looking more confused and began to panic a little. That it might be too dangerous and that Ronan might get hurt. Ronan, however, shook his head and reassured him, claiming that it was like a child's play to him and that he wouldn't die, so Asel had no reason to be scared. Still feeling a bit scared, Asel activated his psychic ability and used it on Ronan for a moment. Ronan was floating in midair, his body suspended by Asel's psychic power. Ronan's eyes widened. All of Asel's abilities were more extraordinary than he had ever imagined. He was reminded of past battles where psychic magic users had enabled him to fight the deities on equal footing. Their unique ability to make him fly was essential, as the deities mostly attacked from the sky. He marveled at how Asel's control over his psychic powers was almost on par with that of a profession. Ronan then smiled, lost in thought that psychic powers were incredibly rare, and finding a talented psychic like Asel so easily felt like a blessing. He couldn't help but wonder why he hadn't met him in his past life. If he was this gifted, no matter what the reason, he knew that would also be a vital asset in the upcoming battle against those bastards. Now he was also struggling and panting. As he said, "I can't hold it any longer. Can I put you down?" Ronan replied with a confident smile, saying that he didn't have to worry about holding his sword. He continued saying he would come down by himself, confusing Asel with great force. Ronan swung his sword in midair, and Asel felt as if the psychic power that he had used on Ronan had been nullified. He was shocked, and Ronan safely landed on the ground from that great height. Asel was still bewildered, asking what that was and how Ronan nullified his attack. Ronan didn't tell him, simply saying it was a secret. When Asel insisted, Ronan playfully punched his head, telling him that he would explain later as they had more important things to do. A small bump could be seen on Asel's head behind Ronan, and from inside, Ronan himself didn't know how he had done it. he was just able to nullify any magic. He then glared at his sword, deep in thought, wondering if it might be the reason why his attack worked on those deities. Asel continued to fire a barrage of questions from behind his mind, a whirlwind of confusion, but Ronan seemed to ignore them. Focused on the task at hand. Placing his sword back in its sheath, he pondered the mystery of his ability but quickly shook it off. There will be time to think about it later. Turning to Asel, he announced that he had passed Ronan's test. He then picked up his bag and tossed it toward Asel, telling him to carry it and follow Asel. His confusion deepened, not only about how Ronan had nullified his attack but also about what exactly was happening now. Ronan, however, was undeterred by his friend's bewilderment. With a broad smile and a dramatic, cool pose, he declared, "This is the beginning of the great Ronan saga, who will save the world." In a moment of vulnerability, Asel struck a cute pose, curling his fingers and gazing at Ronan. He spoke timidly, confessing that though Ronan was talented and strong, he himself knew nothing and was cowardly and timid, his voice revealing his inner fear and insecurity. Ronan demeaned changed his face became serious, and his voice took on a tone of stern resolve. He looked at Asel, his eyes piercing, and asked him if he wanted to continue living his life like this. Cowed and timid Asel listened, his body tense and his eyes wide, as Ronan continued to challenge him. Was he going to waste his talent just to appease some punk? Was this how he wanted to live his life casually? Ronan then added that Asel was not only stupid but also a crybaby who teared up at the slightest thing, always a frightened, scaredy cat. The words seemed to pierce Asel's heart, a painful reminder of his own perceived shortcomings, but then Ronan's tone shifted, becoming more compassionate and earnest. He said that those things didn't matter because they were things that could change from now on. What Asel could never change was the time that he had let flow through the opportunities he had missed and the life he had neglected to live. Suddenly, a wind blew, startling both of them, and their hair fluttered in the breeze. Ronan continued his voice now. The wind blew, which caused both of them to be startled, and their hair blew in the breeze as he continued. His voice is now gentle and filled with conviction. He stated that he would undoubtedly come to regret it someday, and he thought that he would regret it just like he had regretted it in his former life. Ronan placed a reassuring hand on their shoulders, and as his eyes softened, he asked if his speech had a motivational aura or made any impact. Asel's eyes welled with emotion, and a blush spread across his face, and he held out his hand to touch their mouths. Touched by Ronan's care and concern, it was clear Ronan's word had reached him, inspiring him to believe in himself and his potential. "I am telling you there is something wrong with Asel's determined look." Ronan began to move, telling him that he wouldn't force him to change, it was Asel's life after all, but Asel energized and nervously followed Ronan, who insisted that he would definitely change and that he would go to the Imperial Phileon Academy and pass the test. His words were filled with resolve and determination. Hearing T. Seizing the momentum of this triumphant moment, he suggested that they immediately start preparing for the first trial of the upcoming, more manly Asel. Asel caught up in the excitement, struck a commando position, and agreed with enthusiasm that he was ready to take on the challenges ahead to become the person he wanted to be. But behind Asel's back, Ronan's smile turned into something more mysterious, even a little creepy in his mind, recognizing that he had acquired a powerful ally for his future plans. Asel's talent, once hidden and wasted, would now be harnessed for something greater. The scene shifts, the atmosphere becomes tense and thrilling, and Asel and Ronan are hidden in the dense bush, their eyes fixed on a campfire in the distance. The flickering flames cast eerie shadows on the surrounding area, revealing a group of ripped goblins with razor-sharp teeth. They're sleeping beside the fire, evidence of their savagery scattered nearby in the form of chewed bones. The sight is both fascinating and terrifying. Nervously, Asel turns to Ronan and asks if this is his first trial. Ronan replies with confidence, "Of course," explaining that this will be the perfect opportunity to hone his skills. As he says this, his eyes shine with excitement, and his mind is already calculating the steps they need to take with a polite smile. Ronan places his hands on Asel's shoulders, trying to calm his trembling friend. He points out the goblins, commenting on how they look like completely small fries at a glance, but Asel's eyes are wide with fear. His body is drenched and sweating. The challenge before him seems insurmountable, and the reality of what he's about to do is setting in. Suddenly, Ronan's face transforms into a scary and creepy expression. His eyes gleaming with an intense determination, he turns to Asel, his voice low and urgent, and says, "Now, why don't we get started next?" Asel was informed by him that the creatures they were observing were lunar goblins. He explained that goblins are a type of mutation that appeared in this region. Goblins are easily distinguishable from regular goblins due to their yellow skin, which differentiates them from other goblins. However, the characteristics that truly distinguished lunar goblins were not their appearance but rather their peculiar behaviors. They have an insatiable appetite for gold and silver prices. According to Ronan, they like ambushing merchants who are unaware of their presence, stealing their valuables, and bringing them back to their homeland. He went on to explain that after that, they would throw a celebration, but it would only take place on nights when the moon was full, such as tonight. Even as he listened to Ronan, he had a chill that ran down his spine. The horror that he felt caused his eyes to expand, and he swallowed uncomfortably. After that, he inquired of Ronan whether that was the reason they were present, to which Ronan responded with a voice that was brimming with joy and eagerness. "You are totally right, that is the case." Tonight, he made the announcement with a voice that was deep and forceful, and he stated that we were going to steal all of those riches from them. Even in the novels that he had studied at the library, Asel had never seen goblins of this kind before. He had never done so before. After turning to Ronan with a perplexed face, he inquired about the manner in which Ronan was aware of these animals. Simply shrugging his shoulders, Ronan said that he would provide the information when the time was appropriate. While Asel was in the process of unzipping his rucksack, Ronan abruptly wrapped his arm over his shoulder in a casual side embrace. This caused Asel to blush, and he had a look of avarice in his eyes. As the goblins were asleep, Ronan provided them with an explanation of the strategy. Simply transfer the valuables from their chest into this bag. That is all that is required of you. Even though he made it seem easy, Asel did not believe that it was. In spite of the fact that he was contemplating the prospect of making a mistake, Asel did not feel any fear. What would happen if he inadvertently roused the dead goblins? It's possible that they will be engraved with peril or, even worse, be killed. As he continued to communicate his worries, his voice began to shake. "The strategy that you have is quite risky. Are we able to do this again?" As a result of Asel's comments, Ronan's face plummeted. Again, it was obvious that he was irritated by the situation. It appeared as though Asel had reverted to his previous, cowardly personality. As he began to describe the true motivations for their audacious plan to enroll in the famous institution, Ronan's eyes furrowed in concentration. First, they needed a large quantity of money because the monthly charge was exorbitantly costly, and second, they required real expertise in fighting. Both of these things were necessary. While financial resources were essential, experience was much more important. While Asel is seated on the ground and keeping his knees clenched, he listens. Ronan's face was set with resolve as he spoke, and while he had a frightened expression in his eyes, he persisted. Phileon is a gathering place for aristocrats who have spent their entire lives receiving an education of the highest kind. I stated that it was critical. In order to compete with them, the only way to do so is to amass a significant amount of real-world experience in which our lives are at stake. The strategy that Ronan had devised started to take shape, and as they loaded the valuables, they would address their problem with money. Additionally, if the goblins woke up, they would earn experience in fighting. It was an excellent strategy, but it was also hazardous. Despite the fact that they were still terrified and teary-eyed, Ronan glanced at Assel and asked once more whether they needed to reconsider their decision. However, they were aware that they had no other option. He gave a forceful smack on Assel's back, followed by a nod, indicating that he was willing to comply with the plan. Ronan provided him with encouragement to get started, pointing to his open knapsack in a manner that was gradual but steady. To begin, Assel began to place each of the valuables inside the backpack in a sequential manner. A look of intense concentration could be seen on his face. It was almost as if he were popping, yet he was able to effectively transfer all of the wealth without any of the goblins being roused from their sleep. As soon as Ronan saw this, he immediately gave Assel a gentle pat on the head, and his face broke into a pleased smile. He replied, "I knew you'd be able to do it if you actually tried," and even Assel appeared amazed at his own accomplishment with regard to the task at hand. Within his own heart, Ronan felt a sense of warmth as he observed Assel's triumphant smile. In the beginning, he had some reservations about keeping a cell, but it turned out to be far more beneficial than he had expected it would be. Right at that moment, Ronan let out a tone of laughter that was disturbing. He chuckled, and a huge, scary smile crept over his face. His eyes lit up with glee as he laughed. Once all of the riches were securely put away in the bag, it seemed as if he had made a discovery of something of great value. Ronan divulged the news that their mission had been accomplished. Assel let out a sigh of relief, expressing gratitude that the goblins had remained asleep during the entire process. However, Ronan swiftly added that they ought to go at this moment in order to avoid any unfavorable events from occurring. The action then quickly changed to two males racing around in a frantic manner. They were constantly yelling at one another in an attempt to catch the bird-like animals that they were chasing through the bush. Both Ronan and Assel were taken aback by the abrupt loudness, which caused them to question who could be responsible for such a commotion at such an ungodly hour. However, Ronan and Assel were not the only ones who were concerned about the loudness. When one of the goblins awoke from its nap, it turned around and saw that the treasure box was empty with no treasure within. It let out a shrill scream, which jolted the other goblins awake and caused them to start shaking. Immediately, when their gazes fell upon Ronan and Assel, the goblins did not show any hesitation. As a result of being trapped in the unexpected pandemonium, they charged and assaulted them. Assel's face paled, and his voice trembled as he cried, "Oh my God, you are dead for sure." Despair clouded Assel's eyes as he sat on the ground, running through the bag of riches beside him, noting how he had been suspicious that everything had been going too well. Despite the fact that his voice was quivering with dread, Assel suggested that the valuables be returned in the hopes that the goblins would spare them. That plan was promptly shot down by Ronan, who inquired about the manner in which they would subsequently pay their tuition price. As the goblins quickly got closer, Ronan's attention was drawn to his sword, and he had a moment of reflection about how long it would last. Since it was constructed out of inexpensive steel, he predicted that it could survive around 15 blows. There were perhaps 30 goblins coming closer, so he needed to be strategic. They came under attack from 3 goblins that rushed at them on the ground. The swift and threatening ass closed his eyes, anticipating the worst, but the sound that followed ended up being different from what he had anticipated. Upon opening his eyes, he was presented with a scene that would be ingrained in his memory for the rest of his life. When Ronan had finished off all 3 goblins, their heads were severed from their bodies, the air was filled with shimmering drops of blood that gleamed like valuable diamonds, and he looked with his mouth gaping open, unable to comprehend what he had just witnessed. While this was going on, Ronan's blade was dripping with goblin blood, and his eyes were filled with a furious resolve as he scanned his surroundings in preparation for the next wave of hostile forces. After the dust had settled, the sight was a scene of eerie crows with blazing red eyes flying overhead, getting ready to descend upon the goblins that had fallen nearby. Disbelief could be seen written all over Assel's face as he sat on the ground. He was quite confident that this would be the final day of his life. Initially, the entire conflict appeared to be a haze, beginning with a sudden movement. Assel was able to kill all of the goblins in a snap thanks to Ronan's ability to behead 3 of them, then almost magically disappear and return. It appeared as though Ronan was a ravenous beast that was consuming his victim. After realizing that the danger had been erased, Ronan went to Assel and questioned, "Are you still going to continue acting scared?" The response that Assel gave was that he was sorry, but he couldn't help it since his body had simply frozen. He was overcome with feelings of remorse and humiliation. The response that Ronan gave was, "There is no need to apologize," as he was resting his sword on his shoulder and giving Assel a satisfying smile. "It is clear to me. Just keep in mind that you are protected as long as I am present." After that, we witness Ronan expressing his dissatisfaction, stating that he had anticipated that his voyage would be devoid of any disruptions, but his luck never seems to be on his side.